Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this week's Policy Manthan. My name is Krish, and I'll be hosting today's meeting along with Priya. Our topic for today's discussion is the impact of privatization on school education. First off, I'd like to ask all the speakers to drop their subtopics in the chat box so we can call on you directly as we proceed. Before we start, I'll give a brief overview on today's topic so we can get our meeting started. Privatization is something that really had an impact on our economy once our government kick-started the process uh, before the turn of the century. Uh, Privatization in education, however, is one thing that is starting to spread very widely these days. You have school franchises like GD Goenka and Delhi Public Schools, which are all owned privately and are in every single part of our country. I think we all also know that privatization is a result of globalization. Globalization and privatization being connected means that privatization in education also means that private education may lend to a more holistic development of a student. They'll get access to more resources, they'll get access to more varied resources and more diverse resources. Of course, not all of the benefits are positive. Private education isn't available to everybody. The costs are often much higher than the majority of people can afford. And that, of course, will affect who is really taking advantage of that education. Now that we've gotten done with the short introduction, I think we'll start calling on speakers so we can really get everybody's views on the topic. Prithvi, would you mind starting?
Can I go first?
Yeah, please do. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. So, hello everyone. So I am here to talk about parental point of view and how this point of view about privatization influences parents' decision with respect to privatization. So, when we deal with this important realm of privatized school education, from a parental point of view, if you see, they mostly think about whether it's what is the right school education for their children, which is the right school for their child, whether the school provides all the facilities that they are expecting, and what the kids. They think that this privatization give them more option beyond these traditional public schools. So what are the factors that influence these decisions? So, well, it could be academic quality that the school provides. When seen from a parent's point of view, they think that privatized schools offer them a wide range of opportunities wherever they go across the country. They think that privatized schools give them more quality education, or uh, even the availability of the number of schools, or uh, whether they look for cultural, the extracurricular opportunities, or the specialized program that each and every parent expects, whatever it can be. And the second thing is that affordability. So affordability can be a big concern, and there's also the issue of equity and access when it comes to parental point of view. So it is important that we make sure that every family, regardless, gets a fair shot at choosing a right school for their kids. So it is also crucial to provide parents with transparent and reliable information, so that parents get to choose what is necessary for their kid. And it is also important for the kids to choose what they want to be specialized in, on which school they need to study. So there is a need for this transparent information and knowledge in the society. So ultimately, we want to empower parents to make the best choices for the kids' education. And this has two aspects again. So the first is, when parents look for a better school education for their children, there are certain advantages and disadvantages as well. So when we look at the advantage part, this parental choice allows to have, say, the kids' education. They can control their decisions with respect to selecting a school and aligning their values, educational approach, and then what are the specific needs for kids. So private schools offer them specialized program, smaller classrooms, unique teaching method that suits their ideas and stuff. And then specific interest that both the parents and the child want to pursue. So this freedom of choice is provided by private schools. I mean, privatization of schools can provide this freedom of choice. And then this freedom of choice eventually leads to satisfaction of the parents. So the first thing that comes with respect to parental decision is that when they find a suitable school for their kid, they are satisfied. So that is the main part that I would like to highlight here. And when it comes to the disadvantages part, one major concern is the equity and access. As I mentioned ago, it's equity and access. Private school may have higher tuition fees, which every household may not be able to afford, even though they think it's the best school for the kid to study. But they may charge higher tuition fees. It may have it may be less affordable to their household. Maybe their household have low incomes, or only there is a single parent who is working, who may not be able to afford to the school fees. This can result in educational disparities when children from even though when they manage to admit their ward in a privatized school which charges high fees, this may result in educational disparities, where children from disadvantaged background may not have access to the same opportunities. Or when they admit in a school, apart from the school fees, there are other necessities for a student who goes to a school. There are definitely other necessities. And when this low income family when a low income family admits their kid in a school, they may have educational disparities, and there may be lack of equal opportunity to all of them, equal affordability of study materials, or equal affordability of extra coaching centers, whatever it may be. So additionally, the competition for enrollment is also a big task here, because desirable private schools in the society may create an uneven distribution of educational quality and resources across different communities. And we also know that private schools in today's scenario, there is a huge task in getting admission to the board itself. So these are all some of the disadvantages that I wanted to list out. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Prithviraj, for highlighting the parental side of privatization. Now, of course, these private institutions are basically profit-making institutions, and they don't think along the lines of are we creating social inequality, or like are we doing injustice to people who cannot afford private education, of course. But then again, they cater to different needs of parents and the children. So that is why they are much more preferred by parents. And of course, children being children, they don't have much of the same. So with that, let us invite Akanksha next, who wants to talk about current status of privatization on school education. Yes, Akanksha, please.
Yes, thank you, Ria. So, I would talk about the current status of privatization in education system. So, as a matter of fact, let us look at the statistic. That is, between 2001 to 2020, the percentage of private school in terms of total school has increased from 43% to 78%. So total number of schools and universities, if we take, out of that, 78% are uh, private institutions and schools. So this is a great number. And so privatization of education is something which we should focus on. Now, what are the objective of privatization of education basically? So providing quality education. That is one of the important objective of privatization. Promotion of technological advancement, where in government school the pace is slow, but in private educations, private institutions, if we see, it is at a much faster rate. Then reducing gap between industry and education. That is also one of the important factors which private institutions take care of. Reducing gap between, achieving widespread private ownerships in the society and reduce the burden of government. Now, I think government has to, you know, take responsibility of providing education to everyone, but uh, we are a developing country, and so government have certain restrictions, and also um, as a part of the society, industries and some people have to participate, and that's why private schools will definitely help to reduce the burden of government in education, in providing education. Then providing education in remote areas and small urban areas such as community schools can be a good example, which is an example of private education. For example, Jain group people have you know their community education schools, and they provide education in that remote areas, or tribal people have their own uh, private schools. So this is something which we should also consider. Generating highly skilled personnel for development in India. uh, so this is one of the important reason which private schools and institutions focus on, that is generating highly skilled person and meet the education of international standards. That is very important. Of course, government schools also are focusing on these things, but private schools focus on these things at much faster pace. So this is one thing, and government has realized that private institutions can help us to bridge this gap, and therefore I'll give you certain examples that we have bridge courses between or collaborative courses between private schools and government schools, wherein private schools provide and bring their skills to the government schools, and they uh, give opportunities to the students in government schools as well. Uh, Again, I would like to bring your attention on the bill which is recently passed, that is uh, entry of foreign universities in India. That is for higher education, but soon probably we will also have certain bill which will give entry of foreign universities in school education for India. I guess we will have some collaborative uh, approach there. Again, we need to understand that India is part of globalization, and the government alone cannot fulfill all the requirements. So yes, in certain to certain extent, privatization may help to upskill the students, but government cannot uh, overlook and take their hands off from the responsibility, because Article 21A clearly states that free and compulsory education should be provided to the students between the age of 6 to 14. Again, that means this group has to be taken care of education, but higher studies should also be focused by the government, and privatization. Private schools will definitely help in reducing that burden, but government has to take care of it and make certain steps. So this is what I.
Thanks for the great points, Akansha. I think especially the bill you mentioned at the end, which is related to foreign universities. I think that's a very good point because a lot of these foreign universities, I think the bill mentioned that they would look into allowing the top 500 universities in the world to set up campuses in India. A lot of these universities offer internship opportunities and research opportunities to the countries that they're currently settled in. I think there's campuses of, for example, NYU in Dubai and a bunch of other countries in the Gulf. If those colleges could come in India, we would be able to encourage and inculcate interest in students who are in high school as well through programs that they are used to doing already. Next, I'd like to call upon Anjali. Anjali, could you okay. Sorry, my bad, actually. Chetna?
Yes, yeah. It just has some problems switching on my media. It says it has can I just proceed without that?
Sure, Chetna, please go ahead.
Okay. Mm. Okay, I would like to talk about the impact of privatization on the idea of equal education for all. So the impact of privatization on the idea of equal education for all can be seen in various ways, and it has like often been a subject of debate also. So like when privatization can provide access to quality education for those who can afford it, like it also contributes to disparities and inequalities among people. So, like privatization often leads to emergence of high-cost private schools that cater to only like affluent families, and the tuition fees, the additional expenses associated with private education, or that all leads to the financial barriers, making it inaccessible for lower-income families. Um, and then it can affect the students of economically disadvantaged backgrounds, and they may also not have the same opportunities to access the quality education as their wealthier counterparts. So private schools like also tend to have better infrastructure resources, good teaching facilities like compared to public schools, and then they often have like smaller classes, smaller class sizes with like they have well equipped laboratories, libraries, and students is also well equipped with more extracurricular activities. So these discrepancies in resources can also result in disparities in the quality of education with private schools, like which is being perceived as offering higher standard of education. So and then um, it can also contribute to privatization also contributes to socioeconomic segregations in education, and affluent families who can afford private education tend to enroll their children in private schools, but while lower income families are left with public schools. So this division based on socioeconomic status can lead to unequal education experiences and limited social integration among students from different backgrounds. So so yeah, overall, privatization can offer certain advantages. It is crucial to address the potential impact on education for all. Policies and intervention should aim to bridge the gaps and ensure that quality education is accessible to students from all the backgrounds. That's
Yes, thank you so much, Chetna, for highlighting different aspects of privatization in your speech. So, so let us discuss some questions next. Like, given privatization is not a necessarily very good or a very bad thing. It has its pros and cons, but one of the very rarely discussed aspect of privatization is that it also provides many employment opportunities to people. Now, when we think about government schools, if there had been only government schools in India, I think the employment opportunities would have been very limited. But due to the existence of private schools, I think employment opportunities are also provided to many people because of that. So, what is your guys' take on this?
Can you repeat the question again? Like I didn't get it clearly.
Sorry, Prithviraj. Do I need to repeat the question?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was saying that along with like creating some negative side effects like social inequalities, privatization can also provide many employment opportunities as well. So what is your take on that? I was asking about that.
So yeah, with respect to privatization, there are a huge coming up of private institutions. So there's a huge upliftment in the enrollment of students. So with respect to employment, employers will obviously look for a diverse range of students to select whoever they want. So privatization can offer a wide variety of students from various categories, various skill sets, everything, and privatization will lead to tuning these skill sets in different levels altogether. So when from an employer's point of view, it may be an advantage because they get to choose from a wide range of options, and then it would be an advantage for them.
I think in addition to that, the fact that private schools will also employ teachers may also be a large benefit because they often tend to offer higher salaries, which means that people will be more incentivized to become teachers, which means we'll have more qualified teachers in schools as well. Since I think all us, sorry.
Yeah, and also
Yeah.
one more thing I wanted to add was that the accountability system in private schools is like really amazing. So if we compare it to some government schools where we can see a level of lethargy in the teachers and a lot of absenteeism from teachers in certain areas, I think that on the accountability front, I think private schools are doing better than government schools.
I think I agree. Yes, and this will be a very hard thing to actually bring such a mindset to government schools because it becomes something that's become ingrained in our society. So private schools may be the right solution to that. I had mentioned, I think, a few lines ago that teachers may want to get teach in private schools because of higher salaries. Uh, do any of you have any thoughts on what the other effects could be on teachers due to privatization?
But isn't it that government teachers in government schools get a higher pay than most of the private schools? Only some high-end private schools offer salaries, high-end salaries. But then, in a general point of view, the government schools teachers are getting paid more when compared to the
I think
private
I should have clarified my question more because what I meant to convey was more of the amount of pay they're getting in versus the amount of work they're putting in. Government teachers are often also told to go work in voting banks, etc., etc. So it was more of a how much they're getting paid per hour, per hour they're putting into work, right?
Yeah.
So do you believe that teachers would be more than incentivized to go to private schools, or do you think they'll stick to public schools? Because public school teachers often get, like I mentioned, extra work from government-based stuff, right?
But then this extra work, I mean, allotment to polling booths and stuff, it comes only in a certain point of time, but it doesn't come regularly, right? But when it comes to private school teachers, they may not have signed up for something, but since they've enrolled for a private school, the private school has the authority to extract work from them, even if it's long hours or even it's some like what to say. I think they work more than the government school because private schools step into a lot of activities. Like, for example, if there is even a cultural festival in a private school, I think the private school teachers should be able to contribute in all aspects other than education as well. But when it comes to government school, there are certain guidelines on what a teacher should do and what a teacher is not required to do. So in a private school, this is not there.
I think that's a very good point. The boundaries and regulations as to what a teacher's jobs is are much more defined in a public school, which means that a private school teacher may then inadvertently end up doing more work than they expected.
And for a teacher working in a government school, when something goes wrong or some higher staff is asking him or her to do something other than the guidelines prescribed, he or she has an opportunity to raise a complaint to a higher authority, or maybe a district collector as well. And there is an assurance that some action will be taken. But when it comes to a private school, you can only appeal to the principal or the senior principal of that particular school, and it's completely up to the school management whether they take action or not. So there is a difference between working for a government where you get an assurance that you will be here, and then working for a private school where the management is the sole authority there.
Okay, I think that's a very good point where people have more job security and more job comfort when working for a government school, right?
Yeah.
Uh, would you then say that it is? Oh, sorry, Kansha, please go ahead.
Yeah, actually, I would like to add one more point and view in this. Yes, government teachers do have job security, but this scenario was probably 5 years earlier, where government used to recruit permanent teaching staff. Now, the situation is that the government has also stopped recruiting teachers, permanent teacher. So the salary of government teacher is not high. Again, the job security for government teacher is also not there because they are hired for 1 year contractual base. So after 1 year, there is no job security. And again, the amount of work which a government school or a teacher has to do is also high, as same as the private school. Again, I would like to add here that seeing private schools, government school has probably, I don't know about the standards of education, but they have introduced privatization in recruitment. So this is one point which is very important, that why teachers contribution in government school has also stopped, because they don't have job security per se, which teachers in the earlier uh, 5 years earlier used to have. And I am also part of that, and I exactly know how it feels after completion of 1 year, what to do and how it's going to happen. So I think this is one point which we should be taken into consideration.
Thank you, Mama.
I
I
would also
think I
like to
did.
add another
Yeah,
point.
sure. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, so another challenge that this government school teachers face when compared to private school teachers is they are very vulnerable to transfers. Government can transfer a government school teacher to any part of the state, and which the private school teachers need not worry about, because they can't transfer a private school teacher to some other school because it's a private organization. But government school teachers, they are always at the risk of getting transferred, where they have to shift their families or move away from their families to work at some other place, and they may raise a complaint. That's a facility, but they don't have that assurance that it will be processed soon and they'll be transferred somewhere nearby. So there's this risk of thing in the government schools teachers. Yeah.
Okay, that's a very good point, Prithvivaram. And again, thanks to you, Akansha. You raised very good points that I think gave us a lot more nuance as to what and put what Prithvivaram was saying earlier into a new light. Whereas on the surface, it might seem like government teachers have more job security. I don't think any of us here knew about the contractual thing you were talking about. I at least had no idea that was a thing. And yeah, it sounds very scary to, just sit at the end of a year not knowing what to do or where to go. So I think where we're sitting right now is completely different from where we were 5 minutes ago. Government schools seem to be worse workplaces for teachers as compared to private schools. So does anybody have any suggestions as to what we could do in order to make government schools more attractive to teachers? I think the pay is one obvious factor. But again, like Pratibha mentioned earlier, that also depends on the type of private school, right? A low-end private school will probably offer even lesser than what a government school is offering. So if pay is not the issue, what could government schools do to make teachers feel more reassured and more positive while coming into the school over a private school? What could they maybe learn from private schools and inculcate in a government school?
Yeah, I'll just add in my perspective while the others are thinking. I think that health and hygiene, like hygiene in sanitation and hygiene in government schools, is one of the major issue for students as well as teachers. Like I remember a few days back, I saw this YouTube video where all the female teachers, actually it's a documentary and it's available on YouTube. So all the government school teachers had a lot of complaints regarding the washrooms that were there in the government schools. And one of the teacher, I guess she said that she had to go home whenever she had to use a washroom. So I think that hygiene facilities are also important, sanitation and hygiene facilities for teachers as well as for students. So this is some aspect that we can work on. But of course, economic factors override everything else. And a higher pay might induce people to join in as government school teachers. But I think this is something which can also be improved in order to induce people to take up a job as government school teachers. Uh, so let us invite Shivpriya next to present a perspective. Shivpriya.
Yeah, so I wanted to add one thing, like there are several ways through which like we can improve the job of teachers, especially in government schools. Like as one of you mentioned, like we can definitely pay scale should be must. We should increase their salaries, but I believe that there should be a kind of relaxation in terms of their recruitment process. Like if we talk about in government schools, we have a process of UGC net selection, but many times we see that people don't clear it. So what they prefer instead of getting into a government school, they prefer to get a job in a private school, like instead of trying an attempt in UGC net. So I believe there should be a kind of a relaxation in terms of selection procedure in the recruitment of teachers. And I also believe that government should also focus on like professional development opportunities. Like they should provide opportunities for teachers to attend workshops, conferences, and training programs to like enhance their skills and knowledge, and then take various initiatives like to ensure that how we can improve the quality of government schools. And definitely a reduced workload could be another measure to which can improve the recruitment of teachers in government school. Like teachers in government schools often have a heavy workload, which can lead to the burnout or stress. So reducing workload by hiring more teachers or support staff can also elevate this issue. And further, I believe like providing better working conditions, as you said, is like it is also a must. Like uh, we have seen like various incidents like clean issues like clean drinking water or like not comfortable workplace, especially for a female teacher. Like there have been issues of safety issues have been there, and especially like um, if we talk about like maternal leave and all. So these kind of issues have been raised in government schools. And further, we can take like initiative like encourage collaborations and teamwork, and like encouraging collaboration and teamwork among teachers. And like we can create a supportive work environment and improve the quality education. We can even like recognize their performance also. Like we should recognize teachers with rewards, and if they perform well, and like this can be done through like bonuses or providing them incentives. So by implementing these measures, I believe government schools can improve the job of teachers and provide them a better learning environment for students as well. Yeah, so that's all from my side.
Thanks a lot, Shivpriya. Before we wrap up today, I think I'll bring one more question to maybe bring us more on the topic where we started of privatization in education, right? So I think Prathivaram raised a point where he was saying that teachers in private schools may not have the same channel of communication to seek, to seek help if they're having issues in the workplace. Uh, does anybody have any suggestions to what could be done in order to counter that? Could the government make a supervisory board specifically for private schools, maybe? Or how could they maybe standardize the uh, how teachers are treated in all of these schools? Because the government school may be overrun by the local government, but private school may not have the same, may not be able to afford the same policies. Anyone?
Maybe there can be regular staff meetings to facilitate open communication among teachers. like to share their ideas, concerns, and suggestions. Also, suggestion boxes, surveys, confidential email channels, all that can also help.
I think that's a good point, Chetna. Any method of communication where teachers are allowed to air out their problems without repercussions would probably be a great idea. Anyone else? Pratibha, Akansha, do you have any views you would like to share?
No,
Okay.
nothing.
I still
Thanks a
agree.
lot. Then. If that's all for the day, we wrap up our first batch, and I think everybody said all they have to, and we had a very productive discussion, both on how teachers are treated and, well, our main topic of privatization education. Thanks a lot.
Yes, thank you so much. With that, we will be concluding batch one's policy Manthan, and Sneha will take over to moderate batch two's policy Manthan. Thank you.
So, hello everyone, and welcome to the second session of this week's Policy Manthan. So, am I audible?
Yes, Sneha, you are.
Okay. So, to put some context into today's topic, the idea of privatization of the school sector primarily refers to the transfer of power or power and liability from the government bodies to the private ownership. So the idea of privatization of the school sector is multifaceted in its impact, and it also raises various debates regarding the quality of education, access to equal education, cost and affordability. As we know, as per the Article 21A, right to education is a basic right which every child in this country is entitled with. However, with privatization of education, we can say that there are a lot of debates which raises a question to to our right to education. So therefore, in this session of Policy Manthan, we will be taking up the topic of privatization of the education sector, its impact on society and our country's development, and what policies the government has brought forward to tackle with the idea of privatization. So over to you, Jessica.
Thanks, Neha. So, firstly, I would like to call upon Lakshmi to speak a few words about the impact on educational uniformity due to privatization. So, yes, on to you, Lakshmi.
जब मेरा स्टार्ट होने वाला होगा ना तुम बता देंगे 2 मिनट के लिए बस वॉल्यूम कम कर लेना.
Yes, Lakshmi.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. So I'll first start off by elaborating on what I think about educational uniformity. So, based on a few observations, both in personal life and in some studies that I've come across, when it comes to the curriculum and the standardization of the syllabus in many schools, there are many stark differences in the ways that government schools have a particular syllabus and private schools that have been privatized have a different kind of syllabus. Now, in higher secondary standards, this is not very much visible because there are the board examinations that everyone has to commonly prepare for. But especially in the lower classes, especially in the primary school stage from 1st to 5th standard, etc. The shape or the structure of the curriculum is very different for private schools and for government schools. For government schools, bodies like NCERT and the National Curriculum Framework, they work to provide a set of guidelines for both for students and for teachers to follow. So one particular problem here is that the standardized books that NCERT provides is just a basic tool. It's just a guide based on which teachers have to be trained, and they have to provide explicit knowledge with using that particular textbook as a starter. However, this is not being elaborately done in many government schools as well as private schools are doing, which leads to a particular meritocracy in the entire entrance exam aspect later on in higher education. And this non-uniformity is very much visible, especially in the lower classes. So, like initially, I just wanted to point this particular aspect out, but I had joined a bit earlier during the policy discussion, and I happened to hear a discussion on what kind of incentives can be introduced in government schools to ensure that teachers had more of an incentive apart from the stable pay that is being offered to retain themselves in government schools. And one thing I thought of is that there might be some teachers who are not satisfied working in private schools, not apart from pay issues, because they have restrictions on the scope with which they explore their curriculum, the scope with which their methods of teaching are tested upon. And I feel like one particular way government schools or the government curriculum can incentivize this particular aspect is by providing some teachers with good qualifications to some level of autonomy in their teaching methods and giving them some kinds of benefits in response to their new innovative teaching methods. So this can work by, like, during inspections in government schools, inspectors just come, look at whether everything's happening normally, and then they make a report, and it's a very bureaucratic process. But one possible solution that can be introduced here is that instead of just viewing if these things are happening well, checking out if some new initiatives are being introduced by the teachers, and accordingly making a note of it, documenting all that, and providing them incentives tailored to that respect at a grassroots level can go a long way in incentivizing many teachers to change from private to government schools. So that is all I had to say today. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Lakshmi. Yes, so when education becomes a commodity driven by profit motives, it can lead to disparities in access, quality, and affordability. Privately owned schools often have the freedom to set their own curriculum, which can vary widely, resulting in a lack of consistency across institutions. So this lack of uniformity can create educational inequalities, with some students receiving a higher quality education while others are left. Additionally, private schools do tend to have selective admission processes, potentially excluding disadvantaged or marginalized students as well. The emphasis on profit making may also lead to prioritizing the needs of privileged students over those with special needs or learning difficulties. So, on the other hand, public education strives to provide equal opportunities, for all students. It is crucial to strike a balance between private and public education to maintain educational uniformity and ensure equal access to quality education for all students. So yes, moving on, I would like to call Kushagar to speak about impact of privatization and its connect to higher education.
So yeah, hello, good evening, everyone. So when I first read about today's topic, a thing which I didn't notice that was available on web was that its connection to higher education and how this aspect is reflected in the higher education and post graduation. So if we look at data, as I was trying to research about it in the past 1 hour, in the top IITs, NITs, and in medical, be it top medical colleges like AIIMS and universities like BHU and DU, in spite of the reservation that these universities and higher educational boards have, the number of students coming from private background, private school education is much, much higher as compared to the public schools. So what we can infer here from is that the quality is no doubt better in the private sector. And this is very well reflected in the higher education. So another thing is this creates a divide in the socio-economic groups. So the socio-economic groups who aren't able to get admission into good private schools are not just lacking behind in the schools. They get behind in their whole life in some aspect. They have a lot to cover up. If since they won't be getting, it would be very difficult to get into a good college for the higher education too. And so this is something where we need to work upon. The students of the public schools have access and to the higher educational institutes, and this can be done by improving the quality of education in the public schools too. There is a in the Delhi government, it was reflected in the past 2 or 3 years, where the people who could afford private schools voluntarily shifted their students from private schools to public schools. So this is the kind of education that we need to provide to those socioeconomic groups, because we as a nation will only grow when each of our citizens grows. So it's of much more importance that we provide good education to the lower strata of the economy too, so that they are able to compete with everyone and get above in the economic cycle. And the role of public education is very important here, because the privatization of school education can impact the role and perception of public education. Public schools often have mandate to provide education to all students irrespective of their socio-economic background. So this is a plus point, that each category of students have a right to be here. So privatization can divert resources and attention away from public schools, potentially affecting the quality and accessibility of education at primary levels. So this in turn can impact the pipeline of students entering the higher education. So this is where we as citizens should raise our voice upon, and the government should really look into it. That was my thank you.
Thanks a lot, Kushagar. Yes, privatization in higher education in India has had a significant impact on the sector. It has brought about, both positive and negative consequences. On the positive side, privatization has increased access to higher education by creating more institutions and increasing enrollment opportunities. Private universities and colleges have played a crucial role in accommodating the growing demand for education and expanding the range of available disciplines. Additionally, privatization has fostered competition, leading to improvements in the quality of education. Private institutions often have better infrastructure, advanced teaching methods, and industry collaborations, which can enhance students' learning experience and employability. However, there are also concerns, about privatization. The cost of education in private institutions is usually higher, of course, limiting access for economically disadvantaged students, as you mentioned. Moreover, the profit-oriented nature of private institutions can sometimes compromise the focus on academic excellence and research. To mitigate these challenges, yes, it is essential to ensure regulatory mechanisms. They should be in place to maintain quality science standards, monitor fees, and safeguard the interests of students. So yes, moving on to the discussion, I would like to call upon Krishna for to talk about reasons for preference and impacts of privatization. Based on you, Krishna.
Yeah, so some of the reasons private schools are preferred, let's start from the basics. So we know that the government still takes a very small percentage of its budget into investments into education, even in the very present decade, right? So there's not enough investment, and also the presence of private institutions, again, it actually kind of in some ways reduces the fiscal pressure on the government. So I would it would be wrong to completely be against privatization in that aspect. I mean, even in the informal way, I'm not talking about privatization that works in favor of gives services to people who are affluent or doing better economically or financially.
But there is also a side of privatization that is informal private schools where there is not really good facilities of even the most necessary facilities, and as well most of these informal private schools, they don't even have accreditations. They don't have certificates or certifications to go on with a good quality education. Another point is like a reason for people preferring private schools is underdeveloped infrastructure in government schools, when it comes to facilities, and also when it comes to implementing a small policy or scheme, the slow and stifling procedure of the legislatives or the administrative system. It's actually very it's dragging behind people when it comes to joining or promoting government education. Another point that I'd like to emphasize on is inclusive classes in government schools. So most government schools, as we come to see, they have this policy of inclusivity. So they include students from all strata of society, all socio-economic backgrounds, and there's also neglect in from the side of teachers, because there's a high student pupil ratio. Like unlike private schools, who can just hire teachers and give them incentives and promote them. Government administrative system, it works on as we all know, it's actually structured and it's slow, and we know it takes years for like giving posts or distribution of posts when it comes to teacher posts and all that, and that actually leads to higher student pupil ratio and students not getting the attention that they deserve. So when it comes to parents, we just know what their mindset is. They want their children to be taken care of. In private schools, you see this method of teachers making sure whether your textbooks are covered or not. You're checking whether your nails are clean or not. Even these small aspects, it actually adds a lot of importance to the reason a family would prefer private education over government education where a child is being neglected. Now, these are the reasons for preference. Now, like when it comes to impact of implementing the same, private education has actually increased access to education because it has accommodated the growing demand for quality education, just like it has been mentioned several times before in the meeting. And not only that, it has actually led to increased competition, as well as it has pushed private and government schools to improve their standards to attract students. So the focus on quality, it actually has positively impacted the overall educational landscape due to privatization. That's a positive impact. Not only that, there is also the diversification of the diversification of curriculum due to privatization, because private schools in India, they often have this flexibility to offer a diverse curriculum, diverse school boards, alternative pedagogical structures, specialization in programs and all that is something private schools can bring about. As we all know, there are several international curriculums as well, such as IB and all that you guys see around. Also, privatization provides parents and students with a wider choice of educational approaches. So there is scope for customization when it comes to education in private schools. And negative impacts, as we have mentioned several times throughout the meet, commercialization as well as inequality. There is commercial nature in most private schools, and it has, they are openly leading way on their profit-making motives, as well as ways of exploitation. Excessive fee hike is actually an example. There's commercialization of education, along with the disregard for educational norms. So that actually leads to further widening of gap in socio-economic classes. Another challenge is the regulatory challenge. So adhering to educational standards or curriculum guidelines or equitable procedures it is actually seen to cross a line when it comes to private institutions, because there's not a lot of monitoring when it comes to private entities. They work, they have this their own area where local authorities or authorities outside are not actually aware of what's going inside. But I think these a similar aspect is also seen in government schools, because since government teachers don't have this incentive to give one-on-one attention or show up in classrooms at regular times, or they don't have pressure from parents of students to bring perfect grades or whatever. So I think there are both negative as well as positive implications on the same, and that's what I had to talk about. Thank you.
Krishna, you did add on some really good insightful points regarding, yes, the preferences and the impact. And you pretty much covered it all. So yes, moving on, I would like to call upon Vidisha to talk about the problems of privatization in higher education. Yes, Vidisha, on to you.
So I think most of the points are covered, and there's like a lot of repetition of points. So the previous speaker has spoken about higher education and how, so I think about public schools, the main goal of the government is to ensure free and compulsory education from the age of 6 to 14. And with the use of private and public schools, especially basic education, you can cover both, because the government does not have enough infrastructure, nor does it have enough of money to cover the entirety of India. We are very populated. The government is not able to provide access in different parts of India. That is where the private institutions come. When, say, for example, in Northeast, there is a higher rate of private education institutions than government institutions, and it works. Where the private institutions focus more on people who can afford the education, while the public institutions focus more on increasing accessibility and affordability of education. There is a need for an improvement in government education. That is a fact that I think we all agree on. But at the same time, because of the fact that it's compulsory only, this is personally my opinion, but because of the fact that compulsory education, the government's job is to provide compulsory education till the age of 14, all the times they lax when it comes to higher education. In India, currently 60% of higher education institutions are privately owned, which I think is a big problem, because when you think about education, education is considered a stepping stone towards upward mobility, especially in an unequal place like India, where the majority of people are socially or economically marginalized, who require higher education, affordable higher education. Therefore, there is a need for better or more importance to higher education to provide accessible and affordable education as well as quality education. And there are very few government education institutions that do have this, like say JNU. Even that the government is, but the problem is the financial aspect. Even not most recently, a few years back, there was a hike in the fees in JNU, and there was a huge controversy. There was a lot of protests that occurred. So it's difficult to really figure out how exactly you can make the education affordable, because yes, private institutions make it more easier for the government, and they reduce the burden of the government to provide education. They do. The private schools are preferred and they do provide quality education, but also it's money making. But you also have the financial problems with the budget, etc. And currently, most of the education policies, although the most recent education policy does talk about increasing the budget for education, it also focuses on privatization, with a lot of the policies focusing on, they refer to private institutions as philanthropic. Private institutions are like, which kind of suggests that there's an increase in privatization, which I think is bad, as a lot of people have covered in this talk. But there's also the problem of the financial aspect, and how does the government exactly maintain between the two? Because a lot of the problems with
public institutions, especially for higher education, is that there are a lot of students. The teacher-student ratio is unequal. There's not a lot of attention given to students. Many students are very lax, or they do not really pay attention because they don't have the pressure of, say, completing their education. And those are like the common negative perceptions that a lot of people have to public institutions, which need to be changed. That's it. Thank you.
Yeah, Vidisha, I think you're completely right. And it is also true that when we divide education into the private and the public sector, we also create a sense of elitism where education, it becomes more available, quality education becomes more available to the privileged, whereas it is the government's responsibility to provide quality education equally accessible to all the citizens. So, and yes, the student-teacher ratio in this country should really be looked into, because even here, even in West Bengal, we have seen that the teachers are given with like so much more responsibility than that there is in private schools. It really reduces their the time they can provide to the students. So, yeah, let's thank you. So let's move on to the next speaker. Shruti will now speak on the impact of privatization of education on backward classes.
Hello everyone, am I audible?
Yes.
Yes. Today I'm going to talk about the impact of privatization of education on the backward classes. As we see that because of the social stratification, our society is divided into different parts, and where the person belonging from the lower strata has so many difficulties in accessing resources and quality education. Because of the privatization of education, this problem has been increased at a much larger extent, because according to the 86 constitution amendment, education, quality education is the fundamental right for every children. But one who has the resources and one can pay the higher tuition fees has the access to the higher education and quality education. In our country, the private education is seen as the quality education, and whereas the government provided education is seen as the much with low quality of education. And in government sector, we can see the lack of accountability towards the quality of education. So because of the privatization of this education, the uh, students have been divided into different classes, as some of them are able to access to the good quality education, and some of them are they are not. Because of this privatization, uh, there we can see that the gap between the strata is increasing, and it is not benefiting the backward classes. As we see the data according to the research papers and the data, we can see that the only 3 or 4% of the students from the backward classes can go for higher education. And because of such policies of privatization and profit making in the sector of education are demotivating such students from getting quality education. So these all factors are demotivating the students at the lower level, and instead of increasing the enthusiasm about the higher education or anything, it is just demotivating, because if you don't have money, you can't get good quality of education. uh, that that dilemma is getting nurtured between inside the minds of student. So this privatization of the education is not just affecting the society, stratified society, but also affecting the future minds of the kids who belong to the lower caste, or belong to the lower strata of the society, and still are enthusiastic for the higher education. So this privatization of education has come later in India, because for the initial years of planning, uh, when the planning commission was established for making for making the schemes for education. At that time, the universalization of education was the only focus, where the girls' education was also neglected. So, and after such situation, if the in such country where the education for all was the first aim, and in this country after 90s, if the education is getting privatized, it simply shows that we are not fulfilled our first aim, and we are jumping at the higher level. So first aim should be providing a quality of education to everyone, and making ensure that no one is getting neglected from getting higher education and quality of education. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your insights with us, Shruti. The backward communities face a lot of barriers accessing quality education due to various factors such as like the higher cost, the elaborate admission criteria, and also limited resources. Many people belonging to the backward classes, they are first generation learners, which makes it more difficult for them to access quality education. Also, it has been seen in a lot of statistical data that people belonging to the backward classes, they have been linked with the Dalit communities as well, and somehow financial status of a person, that is class hierarchy, has been linked with the caste hierarchy as well. So when we create a divide between public and privatized education, I think we somehow perpetuate the difference that there is between classes that exist in India still. So it is crucial to address these concerns, and I think the government has to provide more equal opportunities for the backward classes in both public as well as private educational sectors. So to call upon our next speaker, we have Mehak. Mehak is going to speak on the impact of privatization on government schools.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes.
Hi, so I'll be talking about the impact of privatization on government schools. So privatization of government schools can have very significant impact on various aspects or various fields of the education system. So first being the competition from private schools can in turn lead to improved educational quality in government schools. So when they see that competition, when they see private schools as the competitors, they may feel this need to kind of enhance their respective teaching methods and their overall performance. However, there is a catch here that the quality improvements are not really guaranteed, and they kind of vary depending upon the effectiveness of the schemes or the kind of principles that have been implemented. Then privatization can impact the access to education. So private schools, as we know, they charge tuition fees, which kind of makes education less and less affordable for disadvantaged families. So as a result of that, privatization can lead to increased educational disparities, with the most vulnerable students being left behind. And this can in turn kind of deepen the social as well as economic inequalities in society. So privatization can has quite an impact on the job security as well as the working conditions of the teachers in government schools. So as private schools expand and more private schools keep on coming up, there is a chance that there might be a reduced demand for government school teachers, which might lead to an increase in transfers as well as unemployability. So additionally, private schools have different employment terms and conditions, which may result in varied job security as well as benefits for teachers. Also, private schools take a very different approach in comparison to government schools. They like to experiment with the education approaches. So such diversification of educational models, such as Montessori. So these models can kind of cater to a broad range of students. and which kind of in turn fosters education diversity within the education system. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Mehak. I would like to call upon Sanskruti to talk about pros and cons of privatization of education in India. So, Sanskruti, on to you.
Good evening, everybody. I think everybody, most of them laid out all the points that I could possibly talk about. So it would feel more of a revision at this point. But I think privatization is necessary as they are better in using the resources and provide better facilities for education where government schools fall short of. Also, another thing about private education is that there is no political influence on the institution. Because a lot of government schools might have the political influence of the government in power right now. Hence, having an impact on the education and the syllabus in general. But even if it is a private institute, I think the owner of the institute or whoever the facilitator is, they also have the power, they hold the power to influence their ideals in the ways of teaching, and might ask the teachers to alter their syllabus or teaching methods to fit their ideals. So that is something we should keep an eye on, whether it's government or in private institution. But other than that, of course, private institutions at this point feels like it has entered a monopoly. They are just monetizing on education and capitalizing education over it. But on the con side, that the underprivileged demographic, which did not have, which wasn't in touch with education, it just falls behind and behind, and the privileged classes become greater and greater. But point. Apart from that, private institutions also have a good impact on good attendance rates. And again, quality education makes all of the difference here. And they also introduce some subjects unheard of and might spark creativity and interest in children in other fields that were previously unheard of. And, provide more quality and broad spectrum of education in every verse that government schools could only provide the basic ones, the few ones which would only suffice for your survival and necessity. Other than that, of course, given all of this, there's obviously no equal chances provided for everybody, even if the underprivileged demographic could afford to go into the private institutes. There would be unfair competition because private institutions always would be accepting donations and everything to, advance somebody who is already in power, or just have the money to reach up the stairs. And all, but on the pro side is that they have better teaching facilities, good faculties and educator, a dedicated team who would take their job pretty seriously because obviously the pay is good. And they would teach in ways that matters. As in government school teachers, I don't think they even are paid a minimum wage that they should be paid. And that also affects your way of teaching and the educators' impact on students. But apart from all this, I think
private institutions also lessen a financial burden on the government regarding education. But that doesn't mean, obviously, that government should be, not paying attention on the education aspect of their life. So until government could, stabilize themselves, come with better policies around education, and, make education free and accessible and and good quality for all, I think that private institutes are doing a good job meanwhile. And so,
Thanks a lot, Sanskriti. Yes, to mitigate the negative impacts of privatization, proper government recognition and oversight are crucial. The government must ensure affordable and accessible education for all while maintaining quality standards. Collaborative efforts between public and private sectors, along with increased investment in public schools, can help strike a balance between privatization and equitable education. So, yes, moving on, I would like to call Saptak to talk about higher education with respect to private education. Yes, on to you, Saptak.
Yeah. Basically, when we are talking about privatization of the whole education sector in our country, I would like to focus mostly on higher education, because in the lower standards, it's more or less okay. Usually what we see in private institutions, I mean private schools, is that as the students tend to go to the higher classes, their fees also increase, in which is essentially a burden on many families. Not everyone can afford that, so that is definitely there. Other than that, if we talk solely about the education, then we will come to a point where we can find out that these private education institutions, they are mostly there for making profit. They are economically driven for that. So since it is making some profit out of it, it's does not necessarily lay a bad impact on the quality of education. However, in the quality of teaching, which essentially also further portrays an effect on quality of education, is that these institutions tend to take teachers who are so-called unqualified or maybe inexperienced to teach at that level. That is solely because they can get it for cheap, just because of their inexperience or their lack of degrees per se. So this is where it impacts the quality of education in private sector, since private sectors are doing this now. Since a majority of students in our country are tilted towards private education, backed by its infrastructural facilities and amenities, uh, mostly, then what the government can do is subsidize a few things from their part, so that and subsidize a few things as in facility wise, and furthermore lay some regulations upon the private sector, so that these kind of malpractices, that I mean not necessarily malpractices, but they are not driven by the right motive. They're driven by the motive of profit, which will affect the education. So unless they are turning this education into, it happens in government institutions, mostly in government colleges, because in a lot of government schools in rural areas, quality of education is also lacking as of now. But if we come to the university level, then it would be safe to say that the government or central universities are far better in terms of quality of education. So if we do the same in that, then it can be essentially solved. And regarding the private sector, some regulations should be there, so that these kind of practices should not be there, and this bad academic environment can be essentially removed. So that is all I would like to say regarding this. Other than that, everything has been summed up already. So.
Thanks a lot, Saptak. Yes, as you said, that everything is covered, basically everything. But yes, a private higher education fosters healthy competition, encouraging public institutions to improve their standards and practices. Ultimately, private higher education contributes to the overall growth and development of the education sector in India. It expands access to quality education and nurturing a skilled workforce for the nation's progress. So yes, absolutely, I agree with you. Moving on, I would like to call upon Abudaya to talk about the causes of privatization. So,
I hope that I'm audible.
yes, you're audible. Kindly switch on your camera.
I'm really sorry. I'm not in a setup to open my camera. I'm really sorry.
Okay. All right. You may go ahead.
So I'll be talking on the cause of privatization. Since we know that education is the most important as well as the powerful tool invented by mankind just to shape and mold himself for personal as well as social life. Moreover, it is the important source of employment, income, or the standard of living. As a result, it has become one of the basic necessities of human life in the materialistic and knowledge society. Hence, the demand for the higher education has increased rapidly after the independence of India. But the central and the state governments are unable to meet the increasing demand for higher education due to financial constraints or the non-availability of appropriate places and the cost of higher education. As a result, the number of self-financed colleges, including arts, science, engineering, medical college, all of these has increased on one hand, and this increased the gap between the demand and the supply of higher education. So this is one point that due to the paucity of resources, uh, the government could not meet or fulfill the demand of the students. Second point would be that privatization by generating more resources from students' fees will help to reduce fiscal burdens of the government. Also, privatization can respond to market signals or market demand for labor in the more efficient and prompt manner than the public or the government sector, which finds it very difficult to introduce flexibility in operations of HR development. So these are basically the points, 3 points.
Thank you so much, Abudaya. So from today's discussion, it is quite evident that privatization of education is a very complex topic, which is brought in discussion as well as critical arguments both in its favor and against it. So while privatization of education has been linked with several factors like competition to provide best services and quality of education, and of course evolution of educational practices and curriculums, it has also brought in a bigger question of equal access to quality education for all. So India as a country has a very diverse class hierarchy where there are people from all kinds of financial backgrounds. And it can be said with great certainty that a large part of the Indian masses do not possess the capacity of obtaining privatized education, even like in higher education, because there are a lot of people who are just first generation learners. So therefore, in this scenario, we can say that as a nation, one of our primary goals should be to bridge the gap between private and government educational institutions, as that ensures that every child in this country is provided with equal opportunity to grow to the greatest heights of their potential. And of course, we can be proud of the fact that our organization is working to achieve a similar goal. So with this, we come to an end of this week's Policy Manthan. It is great to listen to you all. I hope to see you all for the next session.